Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Hockey Talk with TG podcast. I'm Ty Glenn. Hopefully you guys are having a great Friday. Apologies that I couldn't do a show for Wednesday. I was out handling some business-wise stuff. So I couldn't really do a show Wednesday, and I forgot to let you guys know about that. So apologies for that. But we do have a lot of Stanley Cup playoff news to discuss, especially the fact that we are getting a 2024 Stanley Cup Final rematch between the Florida Panthers and Edmonton Oilers. But I'll preview that later on throughout the show. So make sure to stay tuned in to this episode until the end. And as always, if you are watching on YouTube, hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening on audio platform, make sure that you are following the Hockey Talk with TG podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. We are with you guys every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 11:30 a.m. to noon Central Time, 12:30 p.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. So make sure that you give that podcast a follow wherever you're listening from. But without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get started with the NHL news of the day. So we'll recap Games 5 of the Florida Panthers, Carolina Hurricanes, Edmonton Oilers, and Dallas Stars, especially since the fact that I was out Wednesday. So, again, apologies for not coming on doing the episode of that and for not letting you guys know. But the Florida Panthers, they advanced to the Stanley Cup Final with a 5-3 win over the Carolina Hurricanes Wednesday in Game 5. So, of course, no sweep this time in Game 4. The Hurricanes actually shut out the Panthers in Game 4, 3-0 to force a Game 5 back in Raleigh. So no sweep again this time. And the Panthers get it done in 5 games against Carolina. Carter Verhaeghe had the game-winning goal in the third period, assisted by Captain Alexander Barkov. And man, oh man, what a play that was from Alexander Barkov, getting it over to Carter Verhaeghe. Carter Verhaeghe taps it in, wide open there, top shelf, past Freddie Anderson. Caps with the 4-3 lead. And the goal came after Seth Jarvis tied it up for Carolina. And Sam Bennett had the empty netter. And that was all she wrote. And the Florida Panthers win the series 4-1. They advance to the Stanley Cup Final for the 3rd straight year. And they will face the Edmonton Oilers for the 2nd straight year, which I'll get into a recap of that game in just a second. But it was all about the second period surge for the Florida Panthers that powered them to this win. And Matthew Tkachuk, Evan Rodriguez, and Anton Lundell each scored a goal in the second period, turning the tie in Florida's favor. And the Panthers were down 2-0 heading into the second period. So after I saw the Panthers down 2-0 at the end of the first, I thought, okay, Carolina actually came to play. They're looking, well, of course, I wasn't thinking they'll do a reverse sweep because, of course, you're facing against Florida, one of the stacked teams ever. But Carolina had a little bit of life in them, and they tried to put up a fight, scoring 2 goals in the first period, both coming from Sebastian Aho. But the Florida Panthers had a big second period to answer back against the Carolina Hurricanes, and so that is what powered them to this win. So the Hurricanes just kept on fighting, but it was Florida who got the W in the end. Sergei Bobrovsky made 20 saves in the win. And also, just to report, in Wednesday's game against Carolina, Florida forward Eetu Luostarinen left the game due to injury. He did not return throughout the rest of the Game 5. He's not expected to miss significant time, so that is good news to hear. If you're a Panthers fan, but obviously you hate to see one of your players go down with an injury. Not saying that he's, he did come up clutch in that Game 7 against Toronto. I think him and Marchand did, and maybe Seth Jones. I know Seth Jones had a goal in that Game 7, so it was like those 3 that stood out in that Game 7 against Toronto in the second round, so yeah. But fun fact, the Panthers have won all 3 games in Raleigh during the series, so they won in Game 1, Game 2, they actually shut out the Hurricanes in Game 2, and then they win Game 5, so won all 3 of their games in Raleigh throughout the series. And another fun fact, this was something that I saw on the ESPN Instagram page. a Florida team has reached the Stanley Cup Final for 6 consecutive years. Of course, the Tampa Bay Lightning did it from 2020 to 2022, and now you got the Florida Panthers doing it from 2023 to 2025. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, another conference finals exit for the Carolina Hurricanes. Like I said before, they did put up a fight. They tried to crawl their way back into this one, keep themselves in the series, trying to force a game 6. But Florida, like I said before, they're just too stacked of a team. And they're a powerhouse team. Maybe you want to throw a powerhouse team. They're a powerhouse team. Like, it is tough playing against Florida. And the Hurricanes found that out early throughout the series. They actually found that out in 2023. It is tough to play against Florida. They're just too stacked. They cannot be beaten if you're the Carolina Hurricanes. So, but I do respect the grind and the hustle. They did put up a big fight in this one. They didn't get swept this time, just like they did in 2023. They won the conference final game for the first time since 2006, and that was the year that they won the Stanley Cup against the Edmonton Oilers in Game 7. So yeah, I do respect them. Like I said, at least they didn't get swept. Rod Brindamore, he's a heck of a coach, and Paul Maurice actually coached him when he was a player in Carolina as well. I think in 2011, correct me if I'm wrong, this was after Pete Laviolette had coached Rod Brindamore when he took them to the Hurricanes to the Stanley Cup 2006. So, yeah, the Hurricanes have a great team, but it was just the Panthers that got the better of them at the end. But we'll see what's next for the Hurricanes heading into the off season. But moving on from one Game 5 to another in the Edmonton Oilers and Dallas Stars. So the Edmonton Oilers, they hold off the Dallas Stars for a 6-3 win in Game 5 on Thursday. They win the series 4-1, and they advance to the Stanley Cup Final for the second straight year. And fun fact, this is the third time in franchise history that they have gone to consecutive Stanley Cup Finals, and first since they done it in 1987 versus the Flyers and 1988 versus the Bruins. Of course, you don't remember 1983, 1984, they faced the Islanders, and the Islanders were a dynasty team at the time. Of course, the Oilers, they had Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Yari Curry, Paul Coffey, Glenn Anderson, all those other guys, can't really name, Grant Fuhr. In 1983, they were swept by the Islanders. Like I said, the Islanders were a dynasty team. I think they went to the Stanley Cup Final like 4 times in a row during the 1980s. So yeah, dynasty team in the 80s. In 1984, the Oilers won the Stanley Cup against the Islanders in 5 games. In 1987, they won the Cup against the Flyers in 7 games. And in 1988, they won the Cup against the Bruins in a clean sweep. Connor McDavid had the game-winning goal on a breakaway. This, of course, happened in the second period. He also had an assist for a 2-point night. And the Oilers, they got off to a fast start in the first period. They scored on their first 2 shots in the first period with goals coming from former Dallas star Corey Perry and I think another former Dallas star in Matthias Janmark. And we also saw Jake Oettinger getting pulled after allowing those 2 goals on 2 shots in the first 7 minutes and 9 seconds. So when I first saw this happen, I'm like, come on, this is too early. But I kind of understand of why Pete DeBoer did it, because, of course, Oilers, they were getting on track early. This was not looking a good start for Dallas. They were actually down 3-0 in the first period at one point. They got a goal from Jeff Skinner, which was his first goal of the playoffs. And I believe his first career Stanley Cup playoff goal, because this is the first time that Jeff Skinner has played in Stanley Cup playoffs. Of course, throughout the other years he's played in the NHL. He's a veteran, by the way. He's played for Carolina. He's played for Buffalo. And during those times when he was on Carolina and Buffalo, especially Buffalo, he hasn't made the playoffs with them. So this is his first time that he's playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Of course, his first playoff game was back in round 1 against LA. But, still, congratulations to Jeff Skinner. I'm going to get those names mixed up because they're both named Skinner. Their last name is named Skinner, but they're not related to each other. But yeah, that first period was a bad start for Dallas. And, you got Jake Oettinger being pulled in the game. So it was just not looking good for Dallas just 8 minutes into that first period. But fun fact for the Oilers, Corey Perry at age 40 scored his 7th goal of the postseason, setting a record for most goals by player age 39 or older in a single playoff run. So I thought that was a great note to add. Evander Kane and Kasperi Kapanen also scored for Edmonton. Of course, Evander Kane gets his 5th goal of the playoffs and first of the series. He has not played at all during the 2024-25 regular season, and that was because of an injury issue that he was having. So it's kind of funny that he makes this appearance, his first game in the Stanley Cup playoffs against LA. Has not played a single game in the regular season. He's back in the playoffs now, and that's good for the Oilers so they can get all the depth that they need, especially when they're up against the Panthers again. And Kasperi Kapanen, he had an empty netter for the 2nd straight game. Of course, he had an empty netter for Game 4 to seal the win. He gets an empty netter in Game 5 to seal the win. And Stuart Skinner made 14 saves in the win. I forgot to mention this at the top when I was recapping this game. The Oilers did touch the Clarence S. Campbell Trophy because last year they didn't touch the trophy, and now this year they're touching the trophy. Panthers, I forgot to say this when I was recapping the Panthers and Hurricanes. The Panthers did not touch the Prince of Wales Trophy when they won Game 5 against Carolina. Last year they didn't touch the trophy. This year they're not touching the trophy. Oilers last year, they did not touch the Clarence S. Campbell Trophy. Now this year they're touching the Clarence S. Campbell Trophy. Just, to turn their luck in the Stanley Cup Final. But for Dallas, again, after that bad start, they after being down 3-0, they got goals from Jason Robinson and Rope Hintz in the second period to make it a 1-goal game before Connor McDavid made it 4-2. And then in 38 seconds into the third period, Jason Robinson made it 4-3 before Edmonton closed it out with a 6-3 win. So Dallas tried. It was almost similar-ish to Carolina, but in a different way, obviously. So the Stars, they kept trying to claw back. But it was not enough. You can see that they made it a 1-goal game twice. But the Oilers just still piled ahead. They came out with the win. So, yeah, it's obviously in a different way of what happened in Game 5 between the Panthers and the Hurricanes. But the Stars could not do it. They didn't have enough gas to come back and, make this a game. Well, they did, but obviously they couldn't come out with the win. And they couldn't force a Game 6 back in Edmonton, which, if the series was still going on, Stars would have won in Game 5. Game 6 in Edmonton would have been this Saturday. But no, it's not going to be a Game 6. Oilers on their way to the Stanley Cup Final. But I do respect the Stars' effort. They have a lot of depth on their team. As I said, going into the series, it was the superstars versus the depth. It was a lot of stars on each team, no pun intended. But it was the Oilers that came out with the win. One thing that I will remember about the Dallas Stars playoff run was the Mikko Rantanen 4-point night against his former team, getting a hat trick and 1 assist against his former team in that Game 7. That'll be one of the greatest Game 7s of all time. Yeah. But yeah, Dallas season comes to an end. Fortunately, feel bad for Jake Oettinger because one of his goals, besides being the starter for Team USA in the Olympics, was to win the Stanley Cup. And Dallas Stars again fall up short in the conference finals for the 3rd straight year and the 2nd straight year against the Edmonton Oilers. But moving on to the Seattle Kraken. So, of course, the Kraken not in the playoff spot, but they got some coaching moves happen on Thursday, as Lane Lambert was hired as the Seattle Kraken coach on Thursday. He replaces Dan Blisma, who was relieved of his duties on April 19th after one season coaching the Kraken. Lane Lambert previously served as the head coach for the New York Islanders for 2 seasons, compiling a 61 46-20 record in 127 regular season games, and he had a 2-4 record in 6 Stanley Cup playoff games with the New York Islanders, which I believe was in 2023. I think they went up against Carolina that year. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I believe that was the record that he had with the New York Islanders in those 2 seasons. But before joining the Kraken, Lane Lambert was a associate coach with the Toronto Maple Leafs under head coach Craig Berube, which we all know they're making big changes in Toronto. And even before that, Lane Lambert had held various coaching positions, including assistant coaching roles with the Nashville Predators. And before he was promoted as head coach of the Islanders, he was assistant coach for them. And he also coached the AHL's Milwaukee Admirals at one point. And he was also an assistant coach under Barry Trotz for the Washington Capitals during the Stanley Cup run in 2018 when the Capitals went all the way to the Stanley Cup. 2018, Lane Lambert was the assistant coach. And he will reunite with players he previously coached in during the Capitals Stanley Cup run in 2018. Philip Grubauer, Chandler Stevenson, and Andre Burakovsky. And we all know the Kraken overall are making a lot of changes to their organization. They have promoted Jason Bottarelli, hopefully I pronounced that last name right, as their general manager. And Ryan Francis, who used to be the general manager of the Kraken, he's now going to be the team president for them. And assistant coach Jessica Campbell is expected to remain on the team, so she will remain on the team as an assistant coach. And, of course, she made history as the first woman to coach behind the NHL bench. So, of course, growing women's hockey even more. And the Kraken are entering their 5th NHL season and have missed the playoffs in 3 of their first 4 seasons. And so, hopefully, with Lane Lambert being the new head coach of the Seattle Kraken, he could turn this team around and the Kraken could make the Stanley Cup playoffs. And just looking at my phone right now, the Kraken, I didn't put this down for my notes, but I think the Kraken was so close to making the playoffs. Oh, wait, no, I was totally wrong. The Kraken finished with a record of 35, 41, and 6 with 76 points, 20 points out of a playoff spot. So, yeah, I don't know why I said that part. But, yeah, 20 points out of a playoff spot. And like I said, they finished with a record of 35, 41, and 6 with 76 points, 20 points out of a playoff spot right there. And in their division, they were 7th in the division, just above the San Jose Sharks right there. So, yeah, not so good season for the Seattle Kraken. But moving on to the Blackhawks and Jonathan Toews. So Jonathan Toews, as we all know, we talked about this on the Hockey Talk TG podcast before. We talked about the progress that Toews is making, but he is fully committed on returning to the NHL for the start of the 2025-26 season, according to Pierre LeBrun of The Athletic, and also he's an insider for TSN, which I describe as the Canadian ESPN, the Canadian network, sports network for ESPN. Of course, ESPN, America's Sports Network, TSN, Canadian Sports Network. So it's basically just like a Canadian ESPN network for Canadians. So, yeah, that's how I describe it. But yeah, Pierre LeBrun, according to Pierre LeBrun, The Athletic, and he's also insider for TSN, Jonathan Toews is quote-unquote 100% committed to coming back to the NHL for the start of the 2025-26 season. He missed the last 2 seasons due to health issues and, of course, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and he also had COVID issues, tested positive. I believe he tested positive for COVID, not 100% sure, but it was a lot of health issues that Toews was dealing with, and so that's why he decided to step away from the game of hockey. He last played in NHL on April 13th, 2023, which of course was his final game as a Chicago Blackhawk. And of course, unfortunately, ending the overtime loss to the Philadelphia Flyers. I believe a 5-4 overtime loss for the Chicago Blackhawks in Toews' last game with the team. And of course, Kyle Davidson announced that the Blackhawks would not resign him and would not let him come back to the team. And I actually did do an article on Blackhawk Up on the top 6 teams that Jonathan Toews could play for when he does return to the NHL for the start of the 2025-26 season. So I want to make sure you go ahead and check that out. I will put the link in the description below so you guys can read it for yourselves, because I'm not going to tell you on the podcast. You guys just had to read the article. But yeah, I will put that link in the description below so you can see my top 6 teams that I think Jonathan Toews could be a good fit for. He became an unrestricted free agent on July 1st of 2023 and has not signed with another team since, so he's still an unrestricted free agent. But of course, all teams are going to be having eyes on Jonathan Toews, seeing if he can be a great fit for the team and whatnot. But in November of 2024, Jonathan Toews spent 5 weeks in India on a quote-unquote healing journey. So, of course, he shared pictures on his Instagram page, and he said himself that it was a healing journey. So, that's what happened in November. And then in March of 2025, he expressed his dissatisfaction with how things ended in Chicago, and he pointed out to Mark Lazarius of The Athletic his desire to return to hockey. And taking a look at his career achievements, of course, we know Toews has done a lot in the NHL, and particularly obviously with the Chicago Blackhawks. Played 15 seasons with the Blackhawks, and he had 883 points and 1,067 games played, 372 goals, 511 assists for 883 points and 1,067 games played. He led the Blackhawks 3 Stanley Cup championships in 2010, 2013, and 2015. He was named the Conn Smythe Trophy winner for playoff MVP in 2010, and he became captain of the Chicago Blackhawks in 2008. By the way, just in case for those who did not know. And taking a look at his international success, Jonathan Toews won gold medal with Team Canada twice at the 2010 and 2014 Winter Olympics, and he was also named one of the NHL's 100 greatest players during the league's centennial celebration in 2017. Overall thoughts on this as a Blackhawks fan, I think his return could be truly inspiring. It's more kind of like how Gabriel Landeskog returned to the NHL. Of course, he came back in Game 3 of the 2025 Stanley Cup playoffs after missing, 3 seasons due to a knee injury, and Jonathan Toews has been away from the game for a long time as well. And I hope they make a documentary on this, on Jonathan Toews coming back to the NHL, as well as Gabriel Landeskog making his journey back to the NHL. So I think it kind of mirrors that. You know what I mean? But hopefully they create a documentary on it. I think his NHL return will be special for hockey fans to watch, not just Blackhawks fans, but hockey fans overall. I think everybody will be intrigued on how his return will turn out, and hopefully he picks the right team to sign for, and I hope he wins one more Stanley Cup before he retires. But now we're going to preview the 2025 Stanley Cup Final. So, of course, the NHL released the schedule yesterday. Game 1 will be in Edmonton Wednesday, June 4th at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Time. That game will air on TNT, True TV, and HBO Max for you guys to watch, which of course is a rematch of the 2024 Stanley Cup Final. And the Panthers won in 7 games last year. Fingers crossed. Well, I kind of just spoiled my prediction right there, but I'll tell you guys, I'm pretty sure you guys know now, because I think I just spoiled it for you guys when I said fingers crossed. And I thought, I'm not going to say anything else about that to the end. I think I just spoiled my prediction right there. But anyway, rematch of the 2024 Stanley Cup Finals from last year. And the Panthers won in 7 games last year. And I saw on NHL Network that this is the 12th Stanley Cup Final rematch overall in NHL history. But most recently, the Red Wings and Penguins faced off each other in Stanley Cup Final rematches in 2008 and 2009. And take a look at the other three notable Stanley Cup Final rematches. We got, obviously, the Islanders and Oilers in 1983, 1984. We got the Canadiens and Bruins in 1977, 1978, two original 6 teams right there. And then we got the Canadiens and Blues in 1968 and 1969. The expansion era was in 1968 at the time. And we all know the Florida Panthers. This is their 3rd Stanley Cup Final appearance, and of course the 6th Stanley Cup Final appearance for a Florida-based team. For the Edmonton Oilers, they make their 2nd consecutive Stanley Cup Final appearance after losing in 7 games to the Florida Panthers. Last year, of course, they haven't won Stanley Cup since 1990, and a Canadian team hasn't won a Stanley Cup in 32 years. Of course, the last Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup was the 1993 Montreal Canadiens, getting done against the LA Kings, and Wayne Gretzky was on the Kings at the time. But for the Oilers, this is the 3rd time in franchise history that they have gone to consecutive Stanley Cup Finals, and first since they've done so in 1987 versus the Flyers and 1988 versus the Bruins. Taking a look at the Oilers superstars, Connor McDavid, he leads the Oilers with 26 points in 16 playoff games, 6 goals, 20 assists with 26 points in 16 playoff games. Team captain Alexander Barkov leads the Panthers with 17 points in 17 playoff games, 6 goals, 11 assists for 17 points in 17 playoff games. But I think the Panthers' depth scoring could be a little bit of an advantage against the Edmonton Oilers. Of course, they have a lot of depth on the team with multiple players contributing significantly, including Sam Bennett, who has 16 points in 17 playoff games, 10 goals, 6 assists for 16 points in 17 playoff games. And then you got Matthew Tkachuk, who also has 16 points in 17 playoff games, 5 goals, 11 assists for 16 points in 17 playoff games. But for the Oilers, of course, they have a lot of offensive depth too. Leon Draisaitl, he has 25 points in 16 playoff games, 7 goals, 18 assists for 25 points in 16 playoff games. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins has 21 points in 16 playoff games, 6 goals, 15 assists for 21 points in 16 playoff games. So it's hard to tell whose depth has a little bit of an advantage, but obviously with Florida winning last year, they could have the advantage on their side, but we'll just have to see how it goes. Goaltending matchup is going to be Sergei Bobrovsky versus Stuart Skinner, the same goaltending matchup like it was last year. And take a look at their playoff statistics. Sergei Bobrovsky is 12-5 with a 2.11 goals against average and a .912 save percentage and 3 shutouts. Stuart Skinner is 6-4 with a 2.53 goals against average and a .904 save percentage and 3 shutouts. Of course, Calvin Pickard did play in the playoffs with Edmonton Oilers as well. He's still out with an injury, but taking a look at his playoff statistics, he is 6-6 with a 2.84 goals against average and a .888 save percentage in 7 games. 6 of those games he started and came in relief for Stuart Skinner. He first made his playoff appearance in Game 3. He started his first playoff game in this playoffs in Game 3 against LA. But now Stuart Skinner has taken control as the number 1 starting goalie now Stanley Cup playoffs because Calvin Pickard is still injured. Panthers went 2-0 against the Oilers in the regular season. They won 6-5 at Rogers Place on December 16th and then 4-3 at home on February 27th. Now, of course, my prediction, you guys should know this. You guys should already know who I'm picking to win the Stanley Cup this year, and I kind of just spoiled it when I was previewing the 2025 Stanley Cup Final. But you guys should probably already know this. You should watch my bold predictions video on the TG Hockey channel before the season has started, and if you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, I said this a bunch of times, so you guys should already know who I'm cheering for and predicting will get it done in the Stanley Cup Final, and that is the Edmonton Oilers. And I'm going to say the Oilers get it done in 6 games. Of course, they learned a lot from last year after losing to the Panthers last year in the Stanley Cup Final. I'm pretty sure they learned a lot. They're looking for redemption, looking to win the Stanley Cup, and I would love to see Connor McDavid win his first Stanley Cup. We talked about on the Hockey Talk with TG podcast numerous times that Connor McDavid deserves a Stanley Cup. I even said this off air, which of course you guys won't hear because obviously it's off air. I said this off air that Connor McDavid deserves a Stanley Cup. I said on the Hockey Talk with TG podcast numerous times that Connor McDavid deserves a Stanley Cup. One of the best players in the league, if not the best player in the league, and he deserves to have his name on the Stanley Cup. And so I really would love to see Connor McDavid and the Oilers bring home the Stanley Cup. Obviously, a tough task against the Florida Panthers, especially what happened last year. But hopefully this year is a new story. Hopefully that changes. Take a look at the Red Wings. The Red Wings won the Stanley Cup in 2008. And then the Penguins were up against the Red Wings again in 2009 Stanley Cup Final. They won the Stanley Cup. 1983, 1984, when the Islanders and Oilers were facing each other in the Stanley Cup Final. 1983, Islanders won the Stanley Cup. 1984, Oilers won the Stanley Cup against those same New York Islanders. So this could play a trend. This trend could still continue in 2025 Stanley Cup Final, where the Oilers could win the Stanley Cup, and fingers crossed that they do win the Stanley Cup, because I'm going to be rooting for the Oil just like I did last year. I'm going to be rooting for them again this year, so hopefully they get it done. That's going to do it for this episode of the Hockey Talk with TG podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in as always. Really do appreciate it. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe if you're watching the podcast on YouTube and you're listening on audio platform. Don't forget to hit that follow button on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. So yeah, hopefully you guys have a great weekend. Hopefully you have a great rest of your day. God first, as always. Be blessed. I'll see you guys. Well, should I do an episode for Monday? I might do an episode for Monday. I might see you guys on Monday. If I don't do an episode for Monday, I will let you guys know, because obviously we got the Cup Final beginning on Wednesday, and I was actually going to do an episode then. So I think I'll just do an episode Wednesday. Probably skip Monday. Probably not do an episode for Monday. So yeah, I will see you guys Wednesday for another episode of the Hockey Talk with TG podcast. And like I said, hope you guys have a great weekend, great rest of your day. Keep God first. And I'll catch you guys on Wednesday for another episode of the Hockey Talk with TG podcast. Take care.